is super slime, the scientific method. Today, you're going to make 2 separate polymers and test them scientifically to see how a slight modification in the formula causes them to react. Today in Super Slime, you'll need several things to be successful. First, a graduated cylinder. 2 Dixie cups. Water. A 4% sodium tetraborate solution, otherwise known as borax. 2 stir sticks. White glue. A ruler. A black marker. And food coloring. Everything you'll need for Super Slime. Step number 1 in Super Slime is adding 15 milliliters of white glue to our Dixie cup. Now, some of you might say, no problem, I'll just fill 15 milliliters of glue in my graduated cylinder and dump it in. Wait a minute, if you do that, it ain't coming out. I have a special trick instead. Watch carefully. I'm going to fill 15 milliliters of water into the graduated cylinder, pour the water into my Dixie cup. I now know how much volume this liquid will hold. I'm going to take my pen and carefully draw a line right where 15 milliliters of water has risen to. I have now made my very own graduated cylinder in a Dixie cup. Now that I've completed this step, it's your turn. Now what I'm going to do is pour in my water back into my graduated cylinder. We'll use that later. I now know how full 15 milliliters would be. I'm going to carefully pour white glue into my Dixie cup. I will fill it right up to the line that I made with my water. I will now have 15 milliliters of white glue. Perfect. Now that I've entered 15 milliliters of white glue into my Dixie cup, it's now your turn. Step number 2, pouring in 15 milliliters of water into my Dixie cup that's holding 15 milliliters of glue. Watch carefully. I'll pour this in, and now I will add 2 drops of food coloring. It can be any combination you want as long as it's only 2. Today, I'm going to choose 2 drops of green. 1, 2. At this time, I will now stir this solution together. Now, at first the glue will remain white and clumpy. You need to continue stirring until you see this entire solution become the same exact color. It might take a little bit of work. Right now, what I'm doing is stirring the white glue, the water, and the food coloring. Now, white glue is composed of a long chain polymer. And that long chain polymer is like spaghetti strands, stringing all over one another. They're not organized, they're not linked up at all, they're just like spaghetti strands slipping all over each other. Soon, we're going to make those spaghetti strands connect. There we go. You can leave your stir stick in there, and we are ready. Now that I've completed this step, it's time for you to complete this step. Step number 3 is adding 10 milliliters of sodium tetraborate solution to my glue mixture. I will now pour in 10 milliliters of sodium tetraborate into my graduated cylinder. Very good. Now, In this next step, maybe using a partner, I will stir with one hand and pour with another. Continuing to stir, I'm seeing a change. Continue to stir. I'm beginning to see a reaction. Now, as I told you before, white glue is like slippery spaghetti strands, not organized and just running all over one another. What's happening right now, since I've added the borax is a cross-linking agent. It's causing the spaghetti strands to begin not to slip around one another, but to have rungs in a ladder. I now have organized sections of spaghetti strands all lining up with rungs in the ladder. It's now time to reach inside and grab my polymer out of my container. Notice I poured in 3 different liquids: water, glue, and borax, all a liquid, and they've now created a solid. Now I'm going to carefully squeeze. There may be some uncross-linked glue inside of here. Just be very careful. Don't squeeze it too hard to cause it to crush or break. I'm now just squeezing ever so slightly to mix these solutions together. And again, I have now created a solid. We call it super slime. Now that I've created my first polymer, it's time for you to create your first polymer. Now it is time to test our polymer. We're going to put this polymer through 2 different tests. First, we are going to do what's called the stretch test. I'm going to roll my polymer into a ball just like this, squeezing ever so slightly, not to crush it. I'm going to squeeze it, taking note of the time, and have a 60-second stretch test. How far will my polymer stretch in 60 seconds? Right now, this is our first trial. But in science, we always test things 3 times. So after your first trial, simply roll your ball back up, make a nice ball out of it, and you're going to get ready for trial or test number 2. Squeeze it in the middle again, and a 60-second timer. You see, in science, we don't just have one test. We have a series of tests to make sure what we're seeing is accurate and repeatable. That's our first test, the stretch test. Our next test is the bounce test. Making it into a nice ball again, squeezing ever so slightly. I will hold the ball at 12 inches, and I will drop it as a partner determines how high it bounces back. In science, we always want to make sure that our tests are the same each time. And so instead of holding it up about 18 inches and dropping it, I'm going to make sure that I hold it from the same place, 12 inches, as I do my bounce test. Make sure that a partner can keep track of how high it bounces back up. You have 2 tests to do: the stretch test for 60 seconds and the bounce test. Do 3 trials each and keep track. Are you ready? Go. Now that you've tested your first polymer, it's time to modify the formula of that first polymer. You have been given a modification sheet, and only one ingredient is going to change. The question is, how will the polymer be different because that one ingredient has been changed? We're testing this scientifically by only changing one of our variables. Then we can know what changing that one variable does to the result of the polymer. You are going to build a second polymer according to your modification sheet, just as you did before. Remember, don't place glue in your graduated cylinder. Follow the same instructions by adding water, filling it up, drawing a line, pouring the water back, and making your next polymer. I would also encourage you to make sure that you rinse out your graduated cylinder so any residual borax is not found inside. Get ready to make your second polymer. Go. Super slime. the scientific method. You have now created two different polymers, and you've tested them scientifically. You changed only one variable, and you put them through a battery of tests. You now know what changing one ingredient, how that changes the outcome of the polymer. This has been Super Slime, the scientific method.